little louder. Yeah, the dance off is next week. So.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you so very much. Those of you who are watching via live stream and those of you who are here in person, we're so glad to have you here as we are discussing I'm all messed up, I apologize, as the Denver Task Force to Reimagine Policing and Public Safety, along with the Denver Justice Project, come together to have a candidate forum with the candidates for the Denver Auditor. We are looking to have a open conversation about how the Auditor's Office can help in the area of public safety, as well as transparency to ensure that every citizen in Denver is included and understands what is going on in their city. We are happy at this time to introduce to you our two candidates for the office of City Auditor. They are Mr. Eric J. Clark, as well as our current City Auditor, Mr. Timothy M. O'Brien. Thank both of you so much for being here this evening and being willing to engage in this community conversation. I am your host, Dr. Robert Davis, and our moderators this evening are Pastor Terrence Hughes, as well as Giannina Horton.
Thank you, Dr. Davis. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you all for coming. So why don't we get started? So we'll do 3 minutes each for your opening statements. You don't have to take the full 3 minutes. We just want to give you enough time to introduce yourselves, your stance, and tell the public a little bit about who you are. And then from there, we will have about 10 questions that we will go through that Pastor T and I will ask you. So I don't know which one of you guys would like to go first.
Do you have a preference? Go for it. Sure. Hey, Eric Clark, running for Denver Auditor. It's a little surreal running for office. It's something I never thought I'd actually do, but my life has been filled with very surreal events. I was, first of all, going to college for a person of working class background was surreal, but I was able to get into graduate school. I was mentored by Senator John Glenn during graduate school, where I was taught about public service and ethics and responsibility and why all of this really matters. And I think that's really the primary push to running for office. It's that public service aspect, the ability to give back. It was surreal to work my way up to a management level at the world's largest accounting firm, doing audit across the country and globally, everywhere from LA to New York, from rural Illinois to rural Afghanistan. I've worked on performance audits, financial audit peer reviews, construction auditing, as well as IT audits, and taking 2 technology companies public doing their SOX readiness and oversight over their software systems. The exact kind of issues we're faced with here in Denver that need real, strong, robust oversight. Construction, controlling those high construction costs. IT, taking first of all, protecting our personal information and critical systems from bad actors. And performance, looking across the range of both existing programs and emergingly new programs, as we've seen in Denver recently, making sure that our tax dollars are connected to actual results. It's important to have good financial oversight and legal compliance oversight. We need that performance piece and a really strong focus on how our programs can be effective, and if they're not, bring to those recommendations to make them more effective. So I'm excited to be in this race, and I'm excited to talk to folks about, I think, some very important issues today. Thank you.
I'm Tim O'Brien. I'm currently the Denver Auditor, and I'd be honored to have your vote in this upcoming election. I bring over 40 years of experience in accounting and auditing to this office. I'm qualified for this position. I'm a certified public accountant. I've been licensed as a CPA in Colorado for over 40 years. I hold the designation of Chartered Financial Analyst and the designation of Chartered Global Management Accountant. the kinds of audits that we've been doing. We really have professional audit standards that we have to comply with. They're called generally accepted government audit standards. And within those standards, we have done construction audits, we do cybersecurity audits, we do information technology audits, we do compliance audits, we do financial audits, we do performance audits, and more. I'm independent. It's independence and objectivity are the cornerstones of the auditing profession. If you're not independent, you're not objective, your work will be viewed as really being biased and not factual. As a CPA, I have a code of ethics that I subscribe to. That code of ethics is embodied in state law, and I will never approach an audit with anything close to having a preconceived notion of what the outcome of the audit will be. Since I've been auditor under my leaderships, I think our audits are impactful. There's been over 400 of them for Denver. Others, I was the state auditor of Colorado. I performed over 700 audits there. Currently, as the Denver auditor, my office has received 5 awards for excellence in auditing from the Association of Local Government Auditors. 6 years ago, we established a data analytics team where we are able to look at virtually hundreds of thousands of transactions rather than merely relying on statistical sampling. We are seen around the country as a leader in this, and we even have federal agencies coming to us asking us how we're doing certain things. Under my leadership again, Denver Labor, we enforce certain labor laws, and we have built Denver Labor to be the largest municipal wage enforcement entity in the country. Most important, we've returned millions of dollars to people that have earned those dollars and weren't paid correctly at the outset. Denver Labor currently is the subject of a Harvard research on wage enforcement best practices. In my communications team, I have attended over 300 of these kinds of events. Thank you.
Thank you both. Really appreciate the introductions of yourselves and the work that you've accomplished. So our first question we have this evening is, from your perspective, what role does the auditor's office play in public safety and health? And why don't we go back to you? Yes.
So I think it's first important to introduce, we have an OIM, the Office of the Independent Monitor function, that takes on a case-by-case review of when there's a police incident. So I think just to set that stage of understanding that the auditor's role is more systemic in nature rather than looking at a case-by-case basis. I think it's incredibly important to engage on some of these systemic conversations. There was I'm running a positive campaign, so I'll say it directly. I think that there was a very positive audit of the jail system that was effective. But actually, the most impactful audit of public safety over the last decade happened in 2014 under Auditor Gallagher, focused on police response times. So some of those really hard-pressed performance-based topics can have really deep impact, not just in policing, but across the board along public safety and public safety. One of the really, I think, core, do I get a minute or 3 minutes? A minute 30, perfect. One of the core, challenges we're facing in Denver on equity issues that this task force took on directly. In my view, the auditor's office should have been highly engaged in the process. I'm a big believer in a process called auditing forward, meaning you're not just looking in the rearview mirror when it comes to audit work, but the audit has a seat at the table to make programs, to make recommendations more effective by providing those insights early on. And then you just build a firewall so when you have the rear view mirror actual audit. Thank you.
Could you repeat the question?
Yeah, of course. So the question is, what role does the auditor's office play in public safety and health?
Sure, thank you. The auditor's office, the auditor is not a policymaker. The mayor and the city council really are the policymakers. So the auditor evaluates how a policy is implemented or maybe not implemented by a department, such as the police department or the sheriff's office or the fire department. And the role that we play is providing information back to the policymaker about how are those policies working? Are they achieving the kinds of goals and objectives that may be articulated in city ordinance or maybe in the actual budget law itself, which is an articulation of financial policy? And to say, some things are working, some things aren't working, some mid-course adjustment might be necessary, or maybe you need to really start over with a blank sheet of paper. But I think the primary answer to your question is we provide information back to the policymakers on how those programs are working.
Are you familiar with the STAR program? If so, how will you ensure its longevity through the auditor's office? And Mr. O'Brien.
Yes, I'm very familiar with the STAR program. Support Team Assistant Response, I think is the name of the acronym. We have audited elements of the STAR program. We haven't done a complete audit of the STAR program. But again, I think what we do is we look at the direction that has been set for that program and the dollars allocated to it, and the number of people and things like that, and are able to say, is the STAR program doing what it was intended? Are they collecting the kind of data that they should be collecting so that the program could be evaluated, independently and objectively, so that potentially more resources could be allocated to the STAR program or less resources could be allocated to the STAR program if it's not achieving what it should be doing. Thank you for your question.
Thank you.
Yeah, I agree with that response. I would just build on it. It's not just whether it's doing the STAR program is doing what it's intended to do, but is it effective or not? Are we taking a deep dive on the actual performance of the programs? Which aspects are effective and why? And which ones aren't effective and how can we make those effective? So building in those deep recommendations that are thoughtful, smart, and collaborative, especially for a new program like STAR, which has not been around for very long, having that early insight could help those policymakers and those managers of the program make better decisions as they go for a more effective program, as well as holding folks accountable. These are, after all, our taxpayer dollars, and we want to make sure that they are used effectively, compliantly, and legally. So having that insight can be supremely helpful to not just the STAR program, but any city program.
Next question. Should the auditor's office have subpoena power? Why or why not?
Yes. Very simply, yes, period. So especially when we talk about Denver labor, having that external oversight capability to protect workers in Denver from wage theft, as well as implementing that minimum wage. We have over $700 million in stolen wages across the state of Colorado, largely borne by women and people of color, people with disabilities, and really your vulnerable communities. I think we have a responsibility as the new Denver labor rules are implemented to keep equity in mind and have a very clear focus on equity. Subpoena power is another enforcement tool that I think is extremely useful in that sense. It was disappointing to see events unfold and really a failure of leadership as subpoena power was revoked through a lawsuit by the auditor's office appointing that city council. It's just a really disappointing series of events that I think reflects a lack of a thoughtful, collaborative approach from this office, and we can do things better. And other cities have done things better, and I intend to improve on that.
Yes, the auditor should have subpoena power. The auditor did have subpoena power until there was an amendment to the bill at the 11th hour and 59th minute that only one member of the council had seen, who was the person who made the amendment. That amendment limited the authority of the auditor to conduct audits. I will sue the council every time they make an amendment to a bill like that. I did sue them. They repealed the amendment. I would rather have no subpoena power than something in statute that limits my authority, my ability to conduct an audit. Now, the reason I wanted the subpoena power, and it's not for Denver Labor, because Denver Labor has a series of fines that we can impose on corporations or the company that's not paying people that I think will get their attention and it will do what needs to be done. The reason I wanted subpoena power is I had no intention on ever using a subpoena. When I was the state auditor, I didn't have subpoena power as a state auditor, but a committee I reported to, the Legislative Audit Committee, they had subpoena power. In 11 years, there were a couple of departments that were pushing back on providing information. And we said, look, we're going to have to ask the Legislative Audit Committee to use the subpoena power. And that ended the conversation. They provided the information that we were requesting, never had to have the conversation with the Audit Committee about using subpoena power. So it's just a tool to have in the toolbox. You know, it's like we can use the carrot or we can show you the stick. I had no intention on needing to use the subpoena power, but it potentially could be necessary to use it.
Yes. I'm sorry?
Yeah.
Sure,
Yeah.
absolutely, absolutely.
You gentlemen have 2 minutes to answer this question. It'll be easier on the time. Okay?
We've been pretty quick anyways.
Yeah. Thank you.
How will you repair the disagreement that removes subpoena power that was supported and approved by City Council? And I'll preface it with this. There could be, obviously they repealed it, right?
Right.
So if there's any kind of ruffle, if you will, that's a good way to put it.
I think I have a very good working relationship with the city council. Do we agree on everything? No, we don't. I have a very good working relationship with the mayor. Do we agree on everything? Absolutely not. I have a very good relationship with my wife and we don't agree on everything. I mean, I think disagreement is healthy. I think, you know, talking it through gets us to a better place for the most part. Again, this 11th hour amendment that nobody had seen, and for the council to have voted on it, I thought was irresponsible. So I have no qualms about my relationship with the council. The council is going to be changed. I mean, there will be at least 5 new members of the council, so it'll be a different group of people. Thank you.
Given you're the same situation that Mr. O'Brien's in, how would you handle it?
Yeah, so I'll just start by saying that the relationship between the auditor and city council should be approached collaboratively. The auditor should, first of all, show up to council meetings, especially when there's something on the agenda affecting the auditor's office. To have an 11th hour, amendment where the auditor was not even present with a major bill going before council to be voted on is irresponsible in my view. Not only do I intend to show up to council meetings and engage with individual members of city council as well as the overall body, I intend to show up to city council meetings on a quarterly basis and present a summary of audit reports and findings that are relevant to council from a policymaking standpoint. Establishing that collaborative relationship is paramount to the effectiveness of this office. The auditor's office, of course, is not the policymaker, but they do make recommendations to update programs and in some cases policy when things are very much not working, for example. So first of all, showing up, it seems so silly to focus on something so mundane, but showing up is half the battle. We cannot have an effective relationship with, first of all, a legislative body of our government without even showing up to the meetings, let alone showing up when we have something major on the docket.
Yeah, could I take an opportunity to rebut?
I'm okay with that.
Yeah.
I'm okay with that.
So, I mean, this was also during the height of COVID. Everything was Zoom. It is on 3rd reading, which is for final passage. I had met with the council in 3 different committee meetings. I had met with, I want to say 25, maybe 30 organizations around the city and county of Denver to tell them really what I told you. My intentions were to having the subpoena power were to not use it, but to have it as a tool to convince people that if you don't cooperate, we may have to, use a subpoena. But I mean, third reading, final passage, that's not the kind of meeting that I'm going to be showing up for, because they just pass everything. They pass things in a blanket motion, and to be there would be a waste of time. So I think you're showing a little naivete about the process.
No, let's continue on, because we're over time and we want to be cognizant of the, what we have scheduled. So let's see here. Ooh, I don't know what I wrote. Can I see? Can't read my own handwriting. Oh yeah, okay, here we go. What would you do when agencies disagree with your findings and audits? For example, when Mayor Hancock disagreed with the findings in the 2020 audit.
Which one?
The
2020 audit, there were some disagreements that, in the 2020 audit, there were some disagreements that Mayor Hancock had with some of the findings.
I'm not sure which auditor.
Well, let's just do it like this. Let me rephrase it.
Sure.
Let me just,
No,
what would you do when agencies disagree with your findings? Period.
sure. First thing that we do is that we really try to get to yes with the agencies, to get them to agree with the findings and recommendations. That's not always possible. We will follow up on all the recommendations that we make that they have agreed with. We don't follow up on recommendations that they've disagreed with, but we consider those for future audit topics in the future. So we don't just let it drop. I mean, we go through a risk assessment process where disagreement with a recommendation, and we feel that there is significant risk still on the table of an organization not being able to achieve the kinds of objectives that it has set for itself, that could result in another audit.
Sure, just building on that. Sometimes agencies or departments, organizations do disagree with findings. Sometimes they agree with the finding and may have some disagreements with the recommendation. It's important to, as an audit report is in that draft, but prior to that final stage, when it's a draft report version, to engage with the organization and ensure that at the very least the basis of fact in the audit is accurate. I'm not sure, there have been audits throughout Mr. O'Brien's tenure that have questions about this. Most recently, we can point to the Office of Equity within the Mayor's office, disagreements about the simple facts of how the office was structured, as well as challenges the office faced in getting off the ground during a global pandemic. Some of those very bases in terms of setting the stage for an audit, when you disagree on the basics, it's hard to put together a professional quality audit that actually has impact. I think that's the larger concern. Of course, there'll be disagreement, but internal audit, this reminder, this is not an external audit agency, this is an internal audit function, should have a collaborative aspect with that focus on actual impact within the office.
Before you answer, sir, you kind of directed that at Mr. O'Brien, but the question was, what would you do when agencies disagree with your audits?
Sure.
And since you brought up his, what have you done in the past when he disagreed with yours?
Yeah, and we have had findings that agencies did disagree on. But I believe very firmly that on some of those cases, you do hold your ground and you say this is a finding, here are the facts, and you make sure that you can back that up with established documentation and facts. When you're not able to do that, of course, that finding becomes null and void. But I think it's very important that audit work is backed up by that documentation, those facts, and the courage to take on those big issues. And when you, especially on that recommendation piece, which I think is critical, when you agree on the finding and disagree with the recommendation, that recommendation needs to be collaborative in nature. You have to make sure it's, first of all, able to be implemented, but also has that impact to address that finding.
Can I make a point of clarification to the Office of Social Equity audit? They agreed with every recommendation that we made. They were unhappy because somewhere in the report that we didn't acknowledge that the pandemic was making life difficult. I think we do that, but they were unhappy about that. They agreed with everything in the audit report, Eric. I don't know what audit report you read, but it wasn't that one.
Okay, next on to that. And now we're gonna move on. Go back. You lost a little time when you addressed this. But at the closing, if there's time you need to, okay?
Sure.
Tim,
Mhm.
you stated in a 9 News forum that your office gets it right about, quote, mid 90% of the time when it comes to disagreements with agencies you audit. And this is kind of similar to that question. So how does the office rectify errors committed by your office? If you're getting it right in the mid 90s, how does your office rectify the errors committed by your office? And is that an error rate that's acceptable for your when you're dealing with organizations, reputation and funding is on the line?
Sure. They agree with our recommendations about 95% of the time. I think reasonable people disagree on things. What we cannot have the disagreement upon is what are the facts. You and I can have the same facts and have very different opinions about what the facts say, but the facts are the facts. We have never had factual disagreements about what's in an audit report. So I think mid 90% is a pretty good hit rate. We'd like it to be 100, but like I said, I mean, we're adults, we disagree upon things, and that can be healthy too. So I'll hit the period there.
Thank you. Eric, same question for you is what would you do differently as an auditor if your staff was supposed to perform in the same way?
So if the staff is supposed to do what?
Sorry, so if the original question was, how does your office, or for this was a question for Tim, right? How does your office rectify the errors committed by your office? And what's that, what makes that, if I can speak this evening, let me start over. The question is, how does your office rectify the errors committed by your office, especially when your reputation and funding is on the line?
Yeah, errors need to be corrected. So if there is if there are issues within the actual audit reports where there are errors of information, then in an ideal world, those are always caught. When those are not caught, of course, we want to make sure that the agency is reviewing that audit report before it's released to the public, so that any disagreements or errors, factual errors, or just differences of opinion are at the very least acknowledged, and those errors are addressed. If there is a disagreement based on fact, then of course making sure that the auditor's office's position is well documented and can be substantiated, both to the agency because it's important for their understanding, as well as to the general public. And when we're engaging with the press and just residents of Denver, when those disagreements need to be very well established and well documented and supported by whatever work the auditor's office has done. Does that answer the question?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. O'Brien, how can the auditor's office have an effect on the mismanagement of homeless encampments in Denver?
Right now, we are finishing up an audit of the homeless encampments. The audit won't be available until April. And because of the professional audit standards that I'm required to follow, I really can't talk about that audit at this point in time. So we are looking at the homeless encampments, and we will be looking at other aspects of the homeless population in 2023.
Is this the first audit of that?
No, it's not.
So apply that question to the pastor. Can you answer it that way?
We had an audit of the homeless, the way the money was flowing. to the homeless organizations that are providing services, and found it was really disorganized, not centralized at all. And there was, at that point in time, there was $80 million a year going out the door. There could be nonprofits that were not talking to one another. Your nonprofit might be with veterans. Somebody else's nonprofit might be with single mothers. Those people have to come to the table together and talk about things, and have to be able to collaborate and negotiate to get things to help these people who are going through a pretty difficult life. But I think that audit was very impactful in that with the mayor, they created another office to really coordinate all the homeless efforts. And now you're probably aware of the amount of dollars going out in 2023 will be in the neighborhood of $250 million.
Yes, so in the neighborhood, $270 million, so even $20 million more. So in my view, it's concerning that it's taken 8 years to produce a performance audit of homelessness. This issue is so critical in our city. I think it's important to understand where the dollars and cents are going in terms of financial oversight. It's important to have that legal compliance conversation around grant making. The performance piece is that big missing piece of the puzzle. I'm glad it's happening now, but April, 8 years into a term, is pretty concerning when it comes to such a critical issue. Secondly, I'd just like to state that the established best practice by all of the literature and our sister cities across the country and globally is housing first as a policy response to homelessness, as well as wraparound services. It is incredibly important that our audit reports, especially performance audit reports, have the courage to include as recommendations those established, supported best practices.
Another point of clarification, if I could.
So I want to be cognizant of time.
I won't go over that 49 seconds.
Okay, well, I just want to be cognizant that we haven't
Sure.
asked Eric to respond twice.
Reclaim my time?
To say that we've conducted one audit in 8 years is simply false. I mean, I just described one audit that yes, you did.
No, I said,
We described, let me finish.
I mean, it's still my time.
Let me finish. We conducted an audit a couple years ago of Denver's Road Home, which showed the disorganized fashion in which the dollars were going out. And we followed up on an audit of the previous auditor of a program called Denver's Road Home. So this has not been sitting on the shelf waiting for something to happen.
Okay, so love the spirit of a discussion, guys. All right.
We're good friends.
All right, so next question is, why is it important for your office to examine the mental health services in city jails and how the system does or doesn't support people after they're released? And will you commit to addressing these issues during your term?
Yeah, human and social services issues are incredibly important. As we look at DHS and public safety programs, we talk about criminogenic risk and the challenges around not just public safety but poverty being a really significant challenge, not just in our city but across the country. As we see rises in housing costs and inflation, it's becoming more and more difficult to stay afloat for the vast majority of families. I mean, you look at the statistics, and the majority, over 50% of American families, cannot withstand $5. That's a car breaking down. That's a medical payment. So these core programs focused on human and social services run by DHS as well as nonprofit providers that are grantees of the city not only deserve that financial and legal compliance oversight, but that performance oversight, not just to wave a finger of blame when things don't go well, because I think that too frequently audit have where it becomes almost punitive. I think we need to get to the point where he's requesting difficult audits. And I mean widespread requesting difficult audits, especially when we talk about human and social services. These are complex issues. DHS does not deal with widgets. We're not building widgets in a factory here. We're talking about human beings and programs that affect their daily lives and meet their core needs from a nutrition standpoint, from a job training standpoint, from a housing standpoint, and to have that resource that can be the internal audit system within our city to address these issues and frankly protect residents of the city who are at higher risk can be incredibly important and have deep impact and should have deep impact.
The question was related to the mental health services in the jail.
Yes.
And we have conducted an audit of the mental health services in the jail. And actually, I thought my opponent gave me good marks on that one. But the concern I had is that, we do have people with mental health issues that are, incarcerated. They might get treatment, they might not get the kind of treatment, the best kind of treatment, but when they're released from jail, then what happens? Because you could adequately provide them with whether it's medications or some kind of therapy, and then they're released, what happens to them? And there needs to be that continuity of care that goes on in the community. That's important for Denver, for the sheriff in this case, to keep as much data as we possibly can on people. Are they coming back into the jail? Is there a revolving door with certain people? And what can we do? How can we pull them out and provide them special services? So, thank you for your question.
Thank you. What is your highest priority in public safety and health as Denver's auditor?
Is that for me?
So, right, yes, sir.
Sure. Well, we have an audit coming out, I believe, this month on public safety operations. That will begin probably a series of other audits, to see how we can assist public safety through the audit process. We will have a new mayor, as we all know, and how we can assist the mayor in providing what are the issues, what are the findings, what are the things that the areas where we still see the risk of agencies not achieving objectives within public safety, so that the mayor, whoever it is, can hit the ground running, try to match that director of public safety position with the right kind of person going forward.
Thank you. Any question? Yes, same question.
Yeah, and I would just add that I think it's very clear that due to the vacancy rate within the police department, those staffing conversations and conversations around resourcing are hugely important. And audit can provide, I think, guidance in terms of the ability to address some of these core challenges within the Denver Police Department. Largely surrounding public safety issues, I don't want to lose sight that human services and public safety have a direct correlation, and that poverty and crime has a direct correlation. It is challenging to address some of these core challenges. We look at risk in terms of crime and policing. Those audits around human and social services are extremely high on my priority list. I intend for them to be one of my top priorities, actually, in addition to construction oversight across the city. These are some really core critical challenges our city is facing. As far as public safety goes, I'm not sure of the office's intention around those upcoming public safety audits, but I'd be interested to see, depending on when those kick off. I'm not sure of the timeline of those. I know the inauguration is in July. Should I win this election, I will take a deep dive into some of those intended audits as well as intended follow-up audits.
Thank you. So as we're moving to the end of our forum, we're going to allow you an opportunity to redress a question to each other or clear up a statement they may have been misinterpreted or may have not represented what you believe to be factual about yourself from the other candidate to each other. respectfully. And if there's none, we'll move forward. But if there's something you'd like to make clear, now is your time. And we'll give the auditor first. O'Brien.
Are you saying I can ask him a question or clarify something?
You could A, clarify, or B, ask my question, but not both.
Sure, okay. Well, Eric, last week, you bet. Last week, we had one of these forums over at the Channel 8 studio where you revealed that the 650 audits that you've conducted really weren't audits, that they were peer reviews. Those are not conducted in accordance with the kind of auditing standards that the city and county auditor is required to conduct audits with. How will you get up to speed in generally accepted government audits and standards? How will you manage a staff who is very up to speed in those things and you're not?
I got to clarify the question too. So I just want to clarify, I have worked in over 650 financial audit peer reviews of private corporations, governments, nonprofit organizations, university systems across the board. One of my clients required that any grantee have that financial audit peer review, where I've both passed, made recommendations to, and failed CPA firms on inappropriate auditing standards. So there is I think, a very detailed approach to those financial audit peer reviews. But just to clarify, I've also done a lot of other audit work in addition to financial audit peer reviews. That's not the extent of my experience. I've managed audits for governments, university systems, including a large university system with 80 sub-organizations under it, where we had almost 80 individual audit reports that fed into one large audit report. I've worked on audits overseas in rural Afghanistan for federal agencies on the construction and healthcare delivery space. I've worked on audits for major construction projects in major cities, including a $10 billion redevelopment construction program, all under GAAP standards. So I have a pretty deep experience on these issues. I'm appreciative of the opportunity to clarify that misunderstanding, Mr. O'Brien.
Okay, so then,
That's it. And it's your balls in your court.
Yeah. So in terms of questioning, I'd like to go back to that construction conversation. I remember you dodging the question I asked you during that forum. The Denver Great Hall Airport project, easily $1 billion over budget from its original inception. We've double checked those numbers, including hundreds of millions of dollars over budget between that project kickoff and the audit report that came 4 years after the groundbreaking ceremony. Why did it take so long to audit the Denver Airport Great Hall project despite being a $1 billion project?
Yeah, well, first, I asked you to check your fingers because there is not a $1 billion budget overrun. The project has been rescoped to be $1 billion more than it was anticipated to be. There were, you can't really audit poor management decisions and get very far. So we do have an audit that will come out in April of the Great Hall project that I think is thorough. I think will be impactful. I think will show that we are not waiting until the project is complete, but we're waiting for a certain part of the project to be complete.
all right, thank you both. So I want to give you you both an opportunity, a couple of minutes just to close us out, talk a little bit more about anything you want to, yes. Oh, questions from the audience, just kidding. We'll pause on the closing statements. Let me throw it to the audience real quick. Anyone have any questions?
I do have a question from online though.
Yeah, of course. So we have one question online that Dr. Robert Davis will share.
What is your reason for running for auditor? In what areas are you figuring to achieve success That came in from Alice New Moon. What is your reason for running for auditor, and in what areas are you fighting to achieve success? And we'll start off with Mr. O'Brien and then Mr. Clark.
I've been in auditing for a long time. And I think there's a saying, if you find a job that you like, you'll never have to go to work one day. I like what I'm doing as an auditor, but probably what got me most interested in the position was Denver has been a great place for me. I've raised a family here. I've got 3 kids. I've got 5 grandkids. They're all in town. Is there a better way to give back to Denver than by doing something that you do? And I think I do conduct audits very well. There was a second part to your question that I'm trying to recall.
What is your reason for running auditor? In what areas are you fighting to achieve success?
Well, to achieve success, you have to have good people. And I'm fortunate that we're able to attract, retain, educate, promote some very good people. We also enforce these wage laws in Denver. We've recently been given the authority to do civil wage theft. Prior to starting out as auditor almost 8 years ago, we just did prevailing wage. That's where, laborers, pipe fitters, plumbers are working on capital construction projects within the city and county of Denver with Denver money. That was expanded to, that was probably 70 to 80,000 employees. That was expanded to include minimum wage. That's another 120,000 employees. And we are, I think, returning lots of dollars, millions of dollars to those people. And now we have civil wage theft. That means that anybody working in the city and county of Denver, if they think that their wages have been, somehow trimmed, they can file a complaint with my office. That's going to be a big one to get up and running, but I know I've got the right people to get it done.
I think my reason comes down to one word, that's impact. I work for a large firm doing audit work across the country and the world, and I do impactful audits for other communities, other cities, other states, other federal agencies, other corporations. So to be able to affect issues here at home where I actually live in my neighborhood that affect my friends and neighbors, that affect the city that I love, has a really attractive aura to me. I want to have that ability to actually make that impact here at home on topics that folks care about. And I interpreted the second question a little bit differently. So I don't know if it was performance metrics within the auditor's office or her focus was on which policy or topic or programmatic areas we would judge our success. Construction oversight, I think, is critical in our city. So that's a piece that I want to look at very early and in terms of scope deeply on this massive number of construction projects we're seeing in the city to make sure that those projects are successful through good, timely, collaborative oversight. Human and social services is also very much at the very top of my list. These issues, as a person who grew up in a working class household, I've seen firsthand growing up in Cleveland as the Great Recession took hold and factory doors closed and businesses shuttered, and I saw a lot of families struggling. I know what that feels like on a very personal level. So taking on those issues through good, strong performance oversight, not just to make sure that the dollars and cents add up and we have legal compliance. Those are important aspects as well, and I'll look at those too because I've done it before for other communities. But the actual performance piece, are these programs effective and how do we make them more effective? At the end of the day, taxpayers as well as residents receiving these programs deserve a good bang for their buck in terms of an effective city government, and that's my focus area.
Two more questions.
Mr. O'Brien, can you clarify as to the complaint process in your office? What is the way a community member would file it?
There's an email address, wagescomplaint@denvergov.org. Or you can simply call my
office?
You can contact me at auditor@denvergov.org. We will help people through the complaint process, through the investigation process. We will educate the employers about the process that we use to investigate a civil theft complaint. In a perfect world, we would have none of those. We would have no complaints because everybody would be complying with the law. But, things happen. I mean, in a payroll office, you might have a change in whoever the payroll clerk is, and they come in, they don't know what prevailing wage is. And so then they're not paying the prevailing wage and they get behind, and it gets the company, in a hole. We'd rather educate the employers about how to comply with the law than have to ask them to produce a number of checks to people that weren't paid properly.
Yeah.
Was he going to answer that question?
No, he was pointing out.
No,
that
there was a question in the room as well.
You got control.
I'm hands on.
Yeah, it's okay.
I'm curious about the
And
question.
if you wouldn't mind just projecting for the
Sure.
back order.
City council, the question about the subpoena question, and what I'm hearing as a layperson interpreting is trying to limit the auditor's office power. So I have a question about, does your office audit city council's work, their spending, and can you speak to that relationship and the role or the impact the auditor's office can have on oversight for city council? And Eric, would you audit city council spending? What would your role and relationship be in oversight for city council?
Okay. Simple answer, no, I would not audit city council. And I'll tell you why. Auditing city council is like Donald Trump auditing Congress. These are different branches of government. Frankly, city council is a legislative branch of government. I would be happy to, if asked to, come in and provide insights to city council in a formal setting. But to go into city council and demand an audit of their operations, I think is inappropriate.
We have a meeting next week to discuss the audit of city council's operations. There have been a number of city council members that have said they like the audit work that comes out of my office, and they think they would benefit from some of that critical feedback. Being in another branch of government, it doesn't matter. We audited the courts. They're a different branch of government. Had some pretty good recommendations there, particularly in the cybersecurity space.
Online?
We have an online question from actually Denver mayoral candidate Paris LaShawn. He asked, will you audit the sweeps, DOTI, EHS, and DDPHE perform weekly? Will you audit the sweeps that DOTI, EHS, and DDPHE perform weekly?
We have an audit coming out on homeless encampments. The sweeps certainly are part of that. So will there be specific separate audits, discrete audits on those various departments? No. But we're trying to look at it more globally because you get into with the policymakers, providing them feedback. They're going to say, what about the Department of Public Health and the Environment? And if we hadn't looked at that, or if we only looked at that, they'd be asking about transportation or the police department.
So I think the questions, this is the way I'm interpreting the question. So essentially the response should be how the audit plan is put together and how the office should decide which audits should be prioritized and which should not. Which is just broadly how I'm interpreting the question. Jesse, I'm happy to, if you want to reach out on specifics later on, I'm happy to respond. In terms of the overall annual audit plan, it should be risk-based, looking at emerging risks like technology and construction, as well as programmatic risks that where the auditor's office can be the most impactful from a policy perspective, from an impact perspective in terms of the effectiveness of programs, as well as what the most pressing risks in the industry are at the time.
Just a clarification, if you read the audit plan, you would know that we do use a risk-based approach to allocate the resources.
I think I disagree with the approach.
Just keep moving, and we already had your chance to have your rebuttals with each other, so we're gonna honor the time and our chance to ask you questions.
The final question that we have for tonight from online is, what is or will be your process to ensure community is engaged and informed of your office's audits and educated as to what those audits mean to their everyday lives?
We did polling as a part of this campaign, early days, just to understand how aware folks are even of this office's existence. The vast majority, we're talking like 90% of Denver residents, 90% of likely voters who are generally more informed than even just the general public, do not know that the auditor's office exists. They don't even know it exists. So how can you have good public engagement when the folks you need to engage with don't know that you exist in the first place? So first of all, the office needs to show up everywhere. And I'm talking everywhere, not just in terms of inside government with the folks who already know that how this office engages and where it works, but showing up at people's doors. I've knocked on 20,000 doors across this campaign in every single Denver neighborhood. I cannot tell you the number of people who do not know that the auditor's office exists or what the office does. So we need to take public engagement a lot more seriously. This is beyond just throwing out a newsletter and hoping that the people who are already engaged can keep track of what's going on. This is about bringing more people into the fold and engaging at people at their doors, where they show up in their communities, at their grocery stores, at their community centers. It's not enough just to show up to an R&O with people who are already engaged. We need to do that too, or throw out a newsletter. We need to look holistically at our entire Denver community and make sure that folks understand not just how this office impacts their daily lives, but also gathering feedback to make the auditor's office more effective and more focused on the topics that people actually care about.
So when I first ran for auditor 8 years ago, I got similar feedback out in the community. I would tell people, I'm Tim O'Brien, I'm running for auditor, and I'd like your vote. And a number of people would say, I don't really know what the auditor does, so how do I know you're going to do what you say you're going to do if I vote for you? And I decided that I would get back out into the community, and I would be we have been at over 300 RNOs, other community organization type meetings, telling people what's going on in their government, what's going on in the auditor's office. We also use that information from those participants in our risk process, our risk assessment process, because what's going on in the community are things that we should be auditing. I'm not going to audit because somebody sends me an email, but if we start to get a number of emails from around town, we're going to take a close look at attaching some audit resources there. And I'll give you one example, which we were recognized for excellence by the Association of Local Government, was the sidewalk audit that we did. The sidewalk program for the city and county of Denver. The city doesn't spend much money on it because the sidewalks are to be maintained by the property owner. But the condition of the sidewalks in some parts of town are pretty bad. The department estimated that they were behind over 50 years in completing the program. And I think if I remember right, it was closer to 80. Does that sound right? We didn't want to put 80 in the report, but.
Thank you. We have one more online question, and we have one more in-house question.
And this will definitely be the last of the online questions. And that is, if you know, starting with Mr. O'Brien and then moving to Mr. Clark, if you know how much are the sweeps costing taxpayers, and I'm going to add a little bit onto that if it's okay. How much are the sweeps costing taxpayer, and how do we utilize the audit process to inform and to even promote policy changes when the audit demonstrates that the policy is hurting the city? For example, the amount of money that we're paying out to settle police brutality cases and things of that nature, or police misconduct cases. So how does the auditor use those reports to help to move policy in the right direction?
You know, the audit that we will have come out next month, it's not going to just deal with the sweeps. I mean, it's really with the homeless encampments, and the sweeps are part of that. And getting information, getting good data, financial information, was very, very difficult. And we will end up probably qualifying some of the numbers that are in the report that we think that they're incomplete, but these are the best numbers that we have. How that can work for the policymakers, they can start making mandates for the departments to collect that kind of data that will enable them to make more informed decisions. And while we're on data, I mean, every department has mountains of data that could be used better for the executive leaders of those departments to run those departments, and encampments is one of those.
And how would you, I guess the second part of the question was, how does your office, how do you use that data, the audits, information and reports to influence policy? How are you more proactive, I guess? How would you be more proactive in that regard?
I meet with the mayor regularly. I meet with members of the city council and try to push forward in that manner. But I have to respect my role is not to make a policy, but to evaluate the policy. So I can't be pushing a particular solution. I can only encourage them to come up with a solution.
Well, I'll just reiterate, I've said it a couple of times during this forum. I think that the financial and the legal compliance pieces are important. And it'll be good to see, once that audit comes out, where those financial pieces fit in. I think it's important to look at homelessness as well from a performance standpoint, looking at our programs, not just in terms of legal compliance or grant compliance, but whether programs are effective or not. And there are many, many programs focused on homelessness in the city. And for those programs that are effective, calling out their effectiveness and showing through the numbers that these programs are effective. When programs are not effective or aspects of programs are not effective, making those recommendations that could push them better towards effectiveness. I've said it before and I'll say it again, and I've tweeted it and Facebooked it and advocated for it publicly, both city, state, and federal level. We know that the best practice around homelessness is housing first and wrap around services. We know this because it is established. So for an audit to call out as a recommendation, that housing first and wraparound services piece can, one, have deep impact in terms of guiding city council and the new mayor to those kinds of programs, but two, it's totally fair game. It's an established best practice, and we have the data, we have the academic information. It should be a part of every single audit for homelessness.
Yes, thank you both. I actually have 3 questions. Thank you for coming out. First question being, would you support a shift in Denver as a city and county moving from self-insured to exploring what a pooling insurance could look like, similar to larger municipalities in other states, especially in reference to dealing with law enforcement abuse payouts that over the past 10 years have cost Denver residents well over $30 million. We are on track to have spent over $30 million.
Yeah, so I don't think that the auditor's office should take a policy stance, but I would certainly, review if there's a policy change, providing that audit oversight. I think just running back to my proposal around auditing forward as a best practice, whenever you have a new program in place, I think it's extremely useful for new agency heads, new management, a new program, new policies to have that insight from professional auditors to not just address findings after they occur, but to prevent findings from the first place. I always get concerned when auditors only focus on that rear view aspect of audit work. I think that advisory piece, having that auditing forward program, is essential for any 21st century organization at this point. And other organizations in both the public and private sector have shown the effectiveness of a program like that. We can do that here in Denver too.
Mr. O'Brien?
And the question again?
Yes, would you be open, I said support, but would you be open to conversations regarding Denver as a city and county shifting away from being a self-insured city to exploring what it could look like to pool policy with other municipalities to prevent the financial misuse? Money's going to survivors of law enforcement.
Yeah, there's a policy decision, that would have to be made by the mayor, the council. We did conduct an audit of the city's health insurance programs, which were not self-insured. And they do now have self-insured health insurance policies, which saves a few $1 million a year for those kinds of trust funds. But I think it was really be a problem, I think, for the mayor to bring the other mayors of some of the community, the metropolitan community together and tell them what the advantages, what the disadvantages, what might be. The role the auditor could play is to be able to articulate where the risks are that you need to make sure you've got a belt and suspenders on to make sure things aren't don't get off track. I've seen a lot of large pools of money and they get into trouble by people getting too creative.
My next question is regarding, we had discussed a lot about development and construction. This community in particular that we're in right now, 80216, out of a study done in 2017, dealing with 8,600 zip codes around the United States, this was the most contaminated. And I wonder what role can the auditor's office play in holding, or what role can the auditor's office play in the health and longevity of this community through holding big corporations like Suncor, like CDOT accountable for the degradation of this community?
Yeah, I think that is an audit that could be done to see what is going on. Why isn't it being cleaned up? Why are the polluters not part of the cleanup effort? That's not one that I've really contemplated, but that is something that could be done.
Yeah, two things on that. So first of all, I propose a comprehensive climate change audit, similar in the vein of what's pretty commonplace in Australia, Canada, and the EU. A comprehensive climate change audit looks at clean air and water issues enterprise-wide in terms of city government and how the city can impact those big issues. But two, I think the more poignant point here is in terms of clean air and water, it's interesting that some of these factories, big oil and gas refineries, seem to be structured so close to communities of color and lower income communities. How interesting is that? I think it's imperative that this office focuses on equity in terms of every single performance audit. I get concerned when I only see over the course of a decade a single audit focus on just the equity function within the mayor's office. Every single damn audit, every single performance audit the city conducts should have an equity component. Every single one.
Would either of you commit in this next term to auditing what he just asked, that question. So although I know you said you never considered it, but it was interesting and you think it can be. So the question is, would you commit to doing it in this next term? Either one of you, if you're re-elected or if you're elected.
Simply yes. It's a time, like I said, comprehensive climate change audit is very high on my priority list. I'm going to make equity auditing the rule, not the exception.
Yes, I could commit to that. And what I want to say about the equity audits, we have a component of every performance audit where we have a conversation about could there be some social equity imbalance in the program that we're looking at on every audit. We also have a conversation about when we're looking at a particular department, could there be fraud here? And you know, if it's the coffee shop, I mean, I'm not too worried about it, but if it's the distribution, if it's in the treasurer's office where there are, you know, $100 million wire transfers, I mean, that's one where you want to really zero in on the potential for fraud. So we do those kinds of things. We do the kinds of things that Eric says that he would do. And I think we do a lot more, and I think we do them very well.
Thank you very much.
And then my final question is, you had, Eric, you had acknowledged in the Department of Safety, I forget who the auditor was at the time, but they audited the response times of police officers. Current Auditor O'Brien, you had referenced there hasn't been a full audit of the STAR program. Denver Justice Project being one of the organizations that helped bring this organization to fruition and to Denver, to existence. We have also heard in the community that there has been concerns around the response time of STAR vans. In some cases, STAR not even responding at all. I'm wondering, would you commit to a full audit of the STAR program?
I think it would really be an audit of Caring for Denver. They're the ones who administer the STAR program. But yes.
I guess let me rephrase. Would it be possible in reference to the STAR program to audit dispatch and how the vans are being dispatched?
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, we have plans to conduct a very similar audit where we're looking at the response time of the emergency medical technicians that are part of Denver Health floating around the city. Because the sooner you get somebody to the hospital, especially a hospital like Denver Health, which is a well-known trauma center, the more likely we are to save their life. So we will be looking at that, but certainly could look at the one that you're referring to.
Yeah, jumping back to that response time question. So I had a personal experience. I actually had to call 911. I live in Cap Hill. I saw an older woman out in the street on the crosswalk, and I called 911 out of concern for an elderly woman who had a health scare, and I waited easily, waiting for a dispatcher to pick up. It was over 5 minutes as somebody was struggling in the street. It's concerning to me when we talk about resourcing issues that anybody would have to wait on hold for 911 when there's an emergency. This is a life and death issue. This is a public safety issue. I would applaud Dennis Gallagher back in 2014 for his focus on response times. I think it's so critical. And I think we need to, now I mean, a decade later in terms of timing, focus on this issue again, making sure that those response times are prioritized and we can get some good oversight in that area. It's so critical.
All right. Well, thank you both so much for sharing your visions about your role if you're to be reelected or to be elected as auditor. I want to give you a couple minutes just to close out this evening, or anything that you may have missed or that you want to reiterate. Now is your time to do that for the public. Who went first last time? You did? So Eric, it's your turn? Yeah.
I would encourage you to use this time wisely. You won't be able to do it back.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, so, and of course, I'm here to stay after, and if folks want to ask questions, I'm happy to do that as well. But I appreciate the opportunity to speak in this community about, I think, really important issues that are critical to this neighborhood and to the city as a whole. But we need to have a very clear focus as we look, this is a change election in the city of Denver. We're going to have a new mayor, no matter what happens in the election. We're going to have at least 5 new city council members. So there's and of course, we may have a new city auditor. This is going to be a big change election in our city. And the focal point, I assume, is going to change very much so in terms of the performance of programs addressing challenges that we're facing in terms of technology, construction, public safety, homelessness, and we can keep going down this list. So having that perspective in this office of somebody who's worked across the country and globally on these issues, these exact issues actually, can be in both the public and private sector. Those critical thinking skills, the ability to navigate a very changing dynamic in the city and changing risks can be critical to our city's success. I've done this work globally. I've done this work across the country. I have the experience to do it, and frankly, I have the judgment to do it right because I've done it before for other communities. I intend to serve this community well and have that deep impact on programs that affect our daily lives. Thank you. And I would encourage you all to vote when you go forward, no matter who you're supporting.
Thank you. I am qualified to do this job. Obviously, I've been doing this job for 8 years. I'm a CPA, a chartered financial analyst, chartered global management accountant. In my experience, I've got over 40 years of accounting and auditing experience. I've authored over 1,100 audit reports, and I'm talking about where my name is at the top of the letterhead and my signature is at the end of the report. I was auditor, and I've been an auditor in Denver here for 7+ years, Colorado State auditor for over 11 years. I'm free from conflicts of interest. I have the intellectual honesty and the capability to hold the council, the courts, the mayor accountable and for the dollars that they spend, for the programs that they run. No other candidate brings this kind of competence to the auditor's race. I'd ask you to vote, and I'd ask you to vote for Tim O'Brien. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you both for coming out here. This was a strategic location that we have here. And the question that I asked about the commitment, I was also purposeful. This community, we had the Poor People's Rally out here a couple years ago because of what's going on and because of, as Brother Alex had asked, there has not been a comprehensive review of the situations that are going on around here that has affected the health of this community. I want to thank the Johnson Rec Center and their staff for allowing us to hold this forum, and please give them a round of applause. They're an integral part of this community. At one point in time, this rec center was on the blocks to be closed. But once again, this is why your office is so important. And it's not just about the numbers, but it's about the people. And they do come and they do run together. So thank you very much for both of you. Thank you for serving already for 8 years. Thank you for wanting to serve. It is a undervalued office, but one of the most important offices in city government. We want to announce that tomorrow we're going to have also here at the Johnson Rec Center, we're going to have the City Council at Large Forum here at 6 o'clock from 6 to 8. It'll also be aired online again. So please tune in with us tomorrow. If you can, audience, please show up tomorrow as well. We know you guys have a full plate, but this is a powerful season because this will affect Denver. And so we do need everyone to vote. Thank you very much. To my collaborator, thank you so much, Nina. Thank you so much. God bless you all. Have a good night.